The cafeteria smelled like a mix of stale popcorn and floor cleaner. Rows of folding chairs were packed tight with parents, all craning their necks to see the makeshift stage at the front of the room. I found my seat in the middle row right next to Rob Wilson, the kind of guy who wore his baseball cap backward even at PTA meetings. His 8-year-old daughter, Lily, was playing a sunflower in the play. My son, Ethan, had snagged the coveted role of Farmer Joe. "Packed house," Rob said, leaning over as I sat down. "Yeah," I replied, glancing around. Small-town fame at its peak. Rob chuckled. It was the kind of forced laugh people give when they're distracted. He kept glancing toward the back of the room, where his wife, Sophie, stood with a group of other parents. Sophie was the quintessential suburban mom. Yoga pants, an oversized sweater, and a perfectly curated Instagram feed full of inspirational quotes and pictures of her kids' lunchboxes. "She's cheating on me," Rob said suddenly. I blinked. "What?" "Sophie," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "She's having an affair." I froze. That was not the casual dad talk I'd expected during a kindergarten play. Are you sure?" I asked, awkwardly adjusting my seat. Rob nodded, his eyes never leaving her. "Oh, I'm sure. Late nights, secret texts, the whole 9 yards." He took a sip from the coffee cup he was clutching like a lifeline. "I wasn't going to say anything, but—" He paused, finally turning to look at me. "You ever notice anything off about Claire?" My stomach twisted. Claire, my wife, was on the other side of the room, chatting animatedly with a group of moms. She laughed at something, her head tilting back just slightly, the way she always did when she was trying to make a good impression. "No," I said too quickly. "Why?" Rob shrugged, a slow, deliberate motion that felt more like a warning than a dismissal. "Just asking." The lights dimmed, signaling the start of the play, but my mind was racing. The stage came alive with a chorus of kids dressed as vegetables, singing off-key about the joys of gardening. Normally, I'd be laughing, cheering for Ethan as he waved his plastic pitchfork. But tonight, all I could think about was the strange edge in Rob's voice and the way he'd looked at Claire. Next to me, Rob leaned in again. "You think I'm crazy, don't you?" "No," I said automatically, though I wasn't sure if I believed it. "I found texts," he continued, his voice low but urgent, "from an unknown number. Stuff that no friend would be saying." My hands tightened on the armrests. "Did you confront her?" "Not yet," Rob said, his eyes narrowing as he watched Sophie. "But I will." On stage, Ethan was delivering his big line, something about planting seeds of hope. The irony wasn't lost on me. The lights came back on for intermission, but the tension between Rob and me didn't lift with them. Around us, parents stood and stretched, chatting about how cute their kids were and making a beeline for the snack table at the back of the cafeteria. I stayed rooted in my chair, my thoughts spinning like the gears in an overworked machine. Rob hadn't spoken again after his last ominous remark, but I could feel his presence like a stone in my shoe. I glanced over at Claire. She was standing near Sophie now, their laughter rising above the general murmur of the room. Claire held her phone loosely in one hand, and she looked happy, relaxed. For a moment, I almost believed I was overthinking it all. But then Rob leaned in again. "You see the way Sophie's talking to her?" I stiffened. "What do you mean?" "She's like that when she's hiding something," he said, staring at his wife as if she might confess her sins right there in the middle of the school cafeteria. "Acting like nothing's wrong, laughing too much. I've seen it before." "Before?" I asked, my voice tighter than I intended. Rob turned toward me, his face shadowed by the brim of his backward cap. "Yeah, she cheated on me before 2 years ago. We worked through it, therapy, promises, the whole deal. But it's happening again. I can feel it." I wanted to tell him he was wrong, that he was projecting his past hurt onto innocent conversations, but the words stuck in my throat. Something about his certainty, about the way he described Sophie's behavior, planted a small, unwelcome seed of doubt in my own mind. Was Claire hiding something from me? I shook the thought away, embarrassed by how quickly it had taken root. Claire wasn't Sophie, and I wasn't Rob. Our marriage wasn't perfect, but it wasn't that fragile either. At least, I didn't think it was. You've talked to her friends, right? Rob continued, breaking into my thoughts. Claire and Sophie, aren't they close? Sort of, I muttered. They hang out sometimes. Playdates, PDA stuff. Rob nodded, his expression hardening. Then maybe she knows something. Or she's covering for her. Covering? I repeated, trying not to sound defensive. I think you're reaching, man. Am I? He gestured subtly toward the back of the room, where Sophie had just brushed her hand against the arm of one of the dads near the snack table. A tall guy in a Patagonia vest, holding a soda cup like he owned the place. Sophie laughed at something he said, her fingers lingering on his sleeve for just a second too long. I recognized him immediately. Paul Richmond, one of the more involved dads in Ethan's grade. He coached the soccer team and always volunteered for field trips, the kind of guy everyone liked without really knowing why. The thought of Claire acting that way with him or anyone made my chest tighten. You see that? Rob hissed, his voice low but intense. She thinks I'm not paying attention, but I see it. Maybe she's just being polite, I said, but the words felt hollow as soon as I said them. Rob gave me a look that could cut through steel. Open your eyes, Jake. The second half of the play dragged on, though the kids were just as enthusiastic as before. Ethan nailed his part again, delivering his lines with all the seriousness a 6-year-old could muster, and the audience erupted into applause when the final curtain fell. But for the rest of the evening, my focus wasn't on the stage. It was on Claire. Her demeanor hadn't changed much, but now I was hyper-aware of every move she made. Every glance, every smile, every step away from me to chat with another parent felt like a clue to something I didn't want to believe. As the parents shuffled out into the crisp night air, Claire and I walked silently to the car, Ethan skipping ahead with his backpack bouncing against his shoulders. The night felt heavy, as if the weight of Rob's suspicions had followed me outside. Claire broke the silence first. That was cute, wasn't it? Ethan's going to be so proud of himself. Yeah, I said, my voice distant. She shot me a curious glance. You okay? You've been quiet. Just tired. I lied. The drive home was a quiet one. Ethan chattered from the back seat about how he thought his performance had gone, but Claire and I hardly said a word to each other. I kept stealing glances at her, watching the way her fingers drummed absent-mindedly on her thigh, the way her lips pressed together in thought. Was she thinking about me, or about someone else? When we finally got home and tucked Ethan into bed, Claire went straight to the kitchen to pour herself a glass of wine. I hesitated in the doorway, unsure how to broach the storm brewing in my mind. Long night, she said, leaning against the counter and swirling the wine in her glass. Yeah, I replied, my voice flat. You were talking to Sophie a lot. Claire raised an eyebrow. Is that a problem? No, I said quickly. Just, Rob's going through some stuff. He thinks Sophie's cheating on him. Her expression froze for a split second before she recovered. Wow, that's awful. Did he say anything else? He's pretty sure, I said, watching her carefully. He even thinks it might be someone at the school. Claire's grip tightened on the stem of her glass. Well, I hope he's wrong. For their kids' sake. I nodded, but my mind was working overtime. There was something in her tone, too controlled, too casual, that set off alarms. Or maybe it was just Rob's paranoia rubbing off on me. Jake, she said suddenly, setting her glass down and meeting my gaze. Is there something you're trying to say? I hesitated, my stomach twisting into knots. I could feel the moment slipping through my fingers, the chance to address the gnawing doubts head-on. But I couldn't bring myself to accuse her. Not yet. No, I said finally. Just forget it. Claire studied me for a moment longer, her expression unreadable. Then she picked up her wine and headed for the living room, leaving me alone in the kitchen with the weight of everything unsaid. By the next morning, the house felt different. Maybe it was just me. Maybe I was still carrying the weight of last night's conversation with Rob. But something about the way Claire moved around the kitchen as she packed Ethan's lunch seemed careful. like she was going out of her way not to look at me. Egg salad again? Ethan asked, wrinkling his nose at the sandwich Claire tucked into his lunchbox. You love egg salad, she said, ruffling his hair with a smile. That was last week, he shot back, crossing his arms. Her laugh was easy, natural, but it didn't reach her eyes. I'll make something else tomorrow, she said, closing the lid of the box and handing it to him. Now go grab your backpack before we're late. As Ethan dashed out of the room, Claire turned to me. You're still quiet this morning. Did something happen with Rob last night? I hesitated, stirring my coffee just for something to do. No, just a lot to think about. She tilted her head, watching me with an intensity that made me squirm. You sure? Yeah, I said, forcing a smile. It's nothing, but it wasn't nothing. The thoughts Rob had planted in my head were like weeds, choking out every other rational idea. I found myself scrutinizing everything Claire did. The way she lingered over her phone, the way she said goodbye as she grabbed her coat and car keys, felt ridiculous, invasive, but I couldn't stop. That afternoon, I picked Ethan up from school. Claire was working late. At least that's what she told me, so it was just the two of us. Ethan was bouncing with excitement, recounting the applause he'd received during the play, and for a little while, his energy was enough to distract me, until I saw Rob. He was parked in the lot across the street, sitting in his car with the window cracked and a cigarette dangling from his lips. He waved me over when he saw me. Dad, who's that? Ethan asked, craning his neck. Just a friend, I said, my voice tight. Wait here for a second, okay? Ethan nodded, settling back into his booster seat. I crossed the street, my heart sinking as I approached Rob's car. He looked worse than he had the night before. His face pale, his eyes bloodshot, like he hadn't slept. What are you doing here? I asked, keeping my voice low. People are going to notice. I don't care, Rob said, taking a long drag on his cigarette. I needed to talk to you. About what? He leaned out the window, lowering his voice. I confronted Sophie this morning. My stomach tightened. And she denied it. Lied to my face. He snorted bitterly. But I know the truth. I saw more texts. Different number this time, but the same kind of crap. Rob, I'm telling you, man, he interrupted. It's someone here. Someone we know. My mind immediately went to Paul Richmond, the guy Rob had been watching last night. He'd seemed friendly, sure. But friendly wasn't the same as guilty. Was it? Listen, I said carefully. Maybe you should back off for a bit. Give it some space. You're only going to drive yourself crazy. Too late for that, Rob muttered, stubbing out his cigarette on the edge of his window. He looked at me, his expression dark. You ever feel like Claire's pulling away from you? I stiffened. That's none of your business. I'm just saying, he said, holding up his hands in mock surrender. If I were you, I'd keep an eye on things. I wanted to tell him he was wrong, that he didn't know what he was talking about. But the words wouldn't come, because the truth was, I had been keeping an eye on things, and I didn't like what I was seeing. By the time Claire got home that night, I was wound tighter than a drum. She walked in with the same breezy confidence as always, setting her bag on the counter and kicking off her shoes. But when she saw the look on my face, her smile faltered. What's wrong? She asked. Nothing, I said, too quickly. She frowned, crossing her arms. Jake, come on. You've been acting weird all day. I opened my mouth to deflect, but the words came tumbling out before I could stop them. Are you hiding something from me? The question hung in the air like a gunshot. Claire stared at me, her expression shifting from confusion to anger. What are you talking about? I don't know, I said, running a hand through my hair. You tell me. Her eyes narrowed. Is this about what Rob said last night? Because if it is, I don't appreciate you dragging me into his drama. Is it drama? I shot back. Or is it something else? She stepped closer, her voice low and sharp. You seriously think I'm cheating on you? I don't know what to think, I snapped. All I know is that you've been distant lately. And after what Rob said, oh, for God's sake. she muttered, throwing up her hands. Rob is paranoid. He's been paranoid for years. Don't let him poison our marriage just because his is falling apart. Then tell me the truth, I said, my voice rising. Why do I feel like there's something you're not telling me? Claire stared at me for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she grabbed her bag and stormed out of the kitchen. Where are you going? I called after her. I need some air, she said, slamming the door behind her. I sat in the darkened living room for what felt like hours, replaying our argument over and over in my mind. Had I gone too far? Or not far enough? Every time I thought I had an answer, doubt crept in and clouded my judgment. When Claire finally came back, her face was red, her eyes puffy from crying. She didn't say a word as she sat down on the couch across from me, her hands trembling slightly. Do you want to know what's really going on? She said quietly. My heart pounded. Yes. She took a deep breath, her gaze fixed on the floor. Rob's right. Sophie is cheating on him. She told me a few weeks ago. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. What? She didn't tell me who it was, Claire continued, her voice barely above a whisper. But I think I know. Who? I demanded. She hesitated, her hands twisting in her lap. Paul Richmond. I felt a sick sense of relief and dread all at once. Relief because it wasn't me or Claire, but dread because now I knew something I could never unknow. The living room was oppressively quiet, the only sound the faint hum of the fridge in the kitchen. I sat frozen, staring at Claire, who was still perched stiffly on the couch across from me. Her face was a mix of guilt and exhaustion, and her hands kept wringing together like they didn't know how to stay still. Paul Richmond, I finally said, my voice hoarse. Are you sure? Claire nodded slowly, though she didn't look up. Not completely, but I've seen the way Sophie acts around him. It's not just friendly. I thought back to the night before, to Sophie's hand lingering on Paul's arm and the way they'd leaned in close to talk at the snack table. It had seemed innocent at the time, or at least easy to explain away, but now it was impossible to ignore. And you didn't think to tell me this sooner? I asked, my frustration bubbling over. Claire flinched. What was I supposed to say? Hey, Sophie's cheating on Rob, and I think it's with one of the dads from school? What good would that have done? Maybe it would have stopped Rob from losing his mind. I shot back. He's been spiraling for weeks, Claire. He's convinced the whole world is out to get him. And maybe he's right, Claire said sharply. If Sophie's really been doing this, if Paul's involved, then Rob's not paranoid. He's just hurt. That shut me up, because as much as I hated to admit it, she was right. Rob wasn't crazy. He wasn't overreacting. He was a man who'd been betrayed by someone he trusted, and now his world was falling apart. I let out a long breath, sinking back into the couch. Okay, so what do we do? Claire looked at me surprised. What do you mean? I mean, do we tell him? I asked. Do we tell Rob what you think you know? She shook her head quickly. No, we can't. Why not? Because we don't have proof, she said, her voice firm. And if we're wrong, if I'm wrong, it'll just make things worse. I hated that she made sense. The last thing Rob needed was more accusations flying around without any solid evidence. But the idea of sitting back and doing nothing felt wrong, like I was letting the whole situation fester while Rob tore himself apart. Claire stood up, pacing the room. Maybe Sophie will come clean on her own. Or maybe Rob will figure it out without us getting involved. Or maybe he won't, I muttered. She stopped pacing and looked at me, her expression softening. Jake, I get that you want to help him. I do too. But it's not our fight. I wanted to argue, but deep down I knew she was right. No matter how much I cared about Rob, or how much I hated the idea of Sophie and Paul getting away with it, this wasn't something I could fix. At least, that's what I told myself as Claire went upstairs to bed. The next morning, I found Rob waiting for me outside the school drop-off line, leaning against his car with a grim expression. He didn't say anything as I walked up, just handed me his phone. What's this? I asked. Proof, he said. I looked down at the screen. It was open to a string of text messages, The sender listed only as unknown. The messages were explicit, graphic, even, and unmistakably incriminating. They didn't mention names, but the context was clear. Whoever Sophie was texting, they weren't just friends. Jesus, Rob, I muttered, scrolling through the messages. How did you get these? I forwarded them from her phone, he said, lighting a cigarette with shaking hands. She left it on the counter this morning. I couldn't help myself. I wanted to scold him for crossing a line, but the truth was, I couldn't blame him. If I'd been in his shoes, I probably would have done the same thing. Look at the timestamps, Rob said, pointing at the screen. Last night, while we were at the play, I felt my stomach drop. Sophie had been texting someone during Ethan's big performance. Right there in the middle of the cafeteria, surrounded by parents and kids. The audacity of it made my blood boil. Do you think it's Paul? I asked, my voice low. Rob's jaw tightened. I'm starting to. I hesitated, glancing over my shoulder to make sure no one was listening. Claire thinks so too. Rob's eyes snapped to mine. What? She told me last night, I said carefully. She thinks Sophie's been too friendly with him, but she didn't want to say anything because she wasn't sure. Rob took a long drag on his cigarette, exhaling slowly. So it's not just me. No, I said. It's not. He nodded, his expression hardening. Then I'm going to confront him. Wait, I said quickly. Don't you think you should talk to Sophie first? Make sure you've got all the facts before you start throwing accusations around. Rob shook his head. I've talked to Sophie. She just lies and lies and lies. If I want the truth, I'll get it from him. I wanted to argue, to tell him he was making a mistake. But the look in his eyes stopped me. This wasn't a man who could be reasoned with. He was a man on a mission, and nothing I said was going to change that. That evening, I got a text from Rob. Meet me at the soccer field. 6 p.m. I showed up reluctantly, my stomach in knots. The field was empty except for Rob and Paul, who were standing near the bleachers, their voices low but heated. I stayed back, watching from a distance as the conversation escalated. Paul looked confused at first, his hands raised in a defensive gesture. But as Rob started waving his phone around, no doubt showing him the messages, Paul's expression shifted from confusion to anger. I don't know what the hell you're talking about, Paul shouted, his voice echoing across the field. This isn't me, Rob. Don't lie to me, Rob yelled back. I've seen the way Sophie looks at you. I've seen the way you act around her. Paul took a step closer, his fists clenched. You're out of your mind. I've got nothing to do with Sophie, and I don't appreciate you dragging my name into this. I moved closer, ready to intervene if things got physical. But before I could, Paul turned and stormed off, his face red with anger. Rob stood there, breathing heavily, his phone still clutched in his hand. That didn't go well, I said cautiously, approaching him. Rob let out a bitter laugh. You think? For a moment, we stood in silence, watching Paul's car disappear down the road. Then Rob turned to me, his expression hollow. What if he's telling the truth? I didn't know what to say, because, for the first time, I was starting to think he might be. The confrontation at the soccer field left Rob shaken. By the time we parted ways, he was muttering to himself, clutching his phone like it was the only thing holding him together. I drove home with a splitting headache, my thoughts racing in a dozen different directions. Was Paul innocent? Or was he just good at lying under pressure? And if Paul wasn't the other man, then who was? I didn't have the answers, and neither did Rob. But one thing was clear. This wasn't over. At home, Claire was on the couch, her laptop perched on her knees. She looked up as I walked in, her expression wary. How was work? She asked, her voice overly casual. It was fine, I said. But I wasn't at work all day. She closed her laptop, frowning. What do you mean? I hesitated, unsure how much to tell her. Rob confronted Paul tonight. He thinks Paul is the guy Sophie's been seeing. Her face froze for a split second, just long enough for me to notice. Then she recovered, shaking her head. That's ridiculous. Paul's not like that. You're sure? I pressed, watching her closely. Yes, she said firmly. I've known Paul for years. He's a good guy. He wouldn't do something like that. Her voice faltered slightly on the last word, and my stomach twisted. I wanted to believe her. I needed to believe her, but the doubt Rob had planted was still growing. And Claire's reluctance to meet my eyes wasn't helping. What aren't you telling me? I asked, stepping closer. She stiffened. Jake, come on. I've already told you everything I know. Have you? I said, my voice rising. Because the way you're defending Paul makes it sound like you know more than you're letting on. I'm not defending him, she snapped, standing up. I'm just saying Rob's wrong. Okay? Paul isn't the problem. Then who is? I shot back. Claire didn't answer. Instead, she grabbed her laptop and stormed upstairs, leaving me alone in the living room with 100 new questions and no answers. The next morning, I woke up early, determined to get some clarity. Claire was still asleep, and I knew I shouldn't invade her privacy, but the temptation was too strong. I grabbed her phone from the nightstand, my heart pounding as I opened it. The screen was locked, of course, but as I stared at it, a thought struck me. What if she had used the same code she always used for everything else? Her birthday. I tried it. The phone unlocked. My hands shook as I scrolled through her messages, looking for anything out of the ordinary. Most of the conversations were harmless. Texts with her friends, reminders from Ethan's teacher, a grocery list we'd forgotten to update. But then I saw it. A string of texts from a number saved as * work contact. *. The messages were vague but intimate, laced with just enough ambiguity to make my skin crawl. Work contact. Last night was amazing. I can't stop thinking about it. Claire, me too. Can't wait to see you again. Work contact. Soon. Same place. Claire. Yes. I'll make it work. My breath caught in my throat. I stared at the screen, reading the messages over and over again, hoping I'd misinterpreted them. But there was no mistaking what they meant. Claire was cheating on me. I confronted her as soon as she came downstairs, still in her pajamas and rubbing sleep from her eyes. Whose work contact? I demanded, holding up her phone. She froze, her face draining of color. Jake, what are you doing with my phone? Don't change the subject, I snapped. Who is it? Claire opened her mouth, then closed it again. For a long moment, she just stood there, staring at me with an expression I couldn't read. Then finally she spoke. It's not what you think, she said quietly. Really? I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. Because it looks exactly like what I think. Her shoulders slumped, and she sank into the nearest chair, burying her face in her hands. I didn't mean for this to happen. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. So it's true. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I'm sorry, Jake. I'm so sorry. For how long? I asked, my voice shaking. 6 months, she whispered. But it's over now. I ended it. I wanted to believe her, but the betrayal was too fresh, too raw. Who is he? I demanded. At least tell me that much. Claire hesitated, her eyes filled with guilt. It's Paul. The name hit me like a punch to the gut. Paul Richmond? The guy Rob thinks is sleeping with Sophie? She nodded, wiping her tears. It wasn't supposed to happen. It just did. Claire's confession left me reeling, but I didn't have time to process it. I knew Rob needed to know the truth, no matter how much it hurt. That afternoon, I met him at a diner on the edge of town. He looked rough, like he hadn't eaten or slept in days. What's up? He asked, stirring his coffee absently. You look like you've seen a ghost. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. I found out who Sophie's been seeing. Rob's eyes narrowed. Who? It's Paul, I said quietly. But that's not all. What do you mean? I hesitated, then forced the words out. Claire's been seeing him too. Rob's face twisted in disbelief. You're kidding. I wish I was, I said. She told me everything this morning. It's been going on for months. Rob sat back in his chair, his expression unreadable. For a long time he didn't say anything. Then finally he spoke. "Well," he said bitterly, "I guess that makes two of us." Rob filed for divorce the next day. Sophie denied everything at first, but once he showed her the texts, she stopped trying to fight it. Their marriage crumbled like a house of cards, leaving Rob bitter and broken. Claire and I weren't far behind. I tried to forgive her. I wanted to for Ethan's sake, but every time I looked at her, all I could see was Paul. We separated a month later, and though we haven't finalized the divorce yet, it feels inevitable. Paul? He moved out of town, leaving behind a trail of wreckage that will take years to clean up. As for me, I'm still picking up the pieces. Some days are harder than others, but I'm learning to move forward, one step at a time. And every night, as I tuck Ethan into bed, I remind myself that he's the only thing that truly matters. A month after the dust had settled, life had taken on an unsettling quiet, the kind of quiet that creeps into your home after a storm, when the air still smells like rain and you can hear the echo of every distant sound. I had moved into a modest apartment on the other side of town, a temporary place, or so I told myself. Ethan was adjusting better than I had expected, though he asked questions I wasn't ready to answer. "Why can't Mommy live here too? Are you mad at her? Did I do something wrong?" Each question was a dagger, and each answer felt like a lie. Rob and I stayed in touch, though the dynamics of our friendship had shifted. He was bitter, and who could blame him? Every conversation circled back to Sophie. "She won't stop pretending this was my fault," he said one evening over the phone. His voice was strained, distant, like he was calling from the edge of the earth. "She tells everyone I pushed her into it. Can you believe that?" I tried to listen, to sympathize, but I had my own storm to weather. Claire hadn't been nearly as vindictive. If anything, she'd been heartbreakingly apologetic, but it didn't make her betrayal any easier to stomach. "She's rewriting history," Rob continued. "Like what she did wasn't a choice. Like she just fell into it. That's what they all say," I muttered, surprising myself with the bitterness in my voice. It was a Saturday afternoon when I saw Paul again. I had taken Ethan to a local park, trying to keep things as normal as possible for him. He was on the swings, laughing as he kicked his legs higher and higher. For a moment, I felt a flicker of peace. Then I saw him. Paul was standing by the baseball field, talking to a woman I didn't recognize. He looked casual. Jeans, a flannel shirt, sunglasses perched on his head. But seeing him there, in a place where I had come to escape, was like a slap to the face. Without thinking, I walked over. "Jake," he said, his voice tinged with surprise, and something else I couldn't quite place. "Hey, Paul," I said, my voice colder than I intended. The woman excused herself quickly, sensing the tension. Paul shoved his hands in his pockets, rocking back on his heels. "Didn't expect to see you here," he said. "Yeah, well," I said, crossing my arms. "Small town." He nodded, glancing toward Ethan on the swings. "How's Ethan doing?" "Fine," I said curtly. "How's Sophie?" His jaw tightened. "We're not seeing each other anymore." "Oh," I said, raising an eyebrow. "Trouble in paradise?" "Jake, come on," he said, his tone almost pleading. "I know I screwed up. I know I hurt people. But you think this is about me forgiving you?" I cut him off, my voice low but sharp. "It's not. It's about Ethan. It's about Rob. It's about every damn person you threw under the bus so you could get your kicks." Paul flinched but didn't respond. He just stood there, looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Regret? Shame? I didn't care. "You stay away from me," I said. "You stay away from my family." Without waiting for a response, I turned and walked back to Ethan, who was still swinging happily, blissfully unaware of the storm raging just a few feet away. That night, I sat in Ethan's room watching him sleep. His small chest rose and fell in the soft glow of his nightlight, and for the first time in weeks, I felt the tension in my shoulders begin to ease. I'd made mistakes, trusting the wrong people, ignoring the warning signs, but Ethan was still my anchor. He was the one thing I could hold on to when everything else felt like it was slipping through my fingers. I thought about Claire, about the life we'd built together and the life we'd thrown away. I wondered if she was sitting in our old house, thinking about me, thinking about us. Part of me wanted to call her, to tell her I missed her, even if it wasn't true, to hear her voice, even if it hurt. But I didn't. Instead, I sat there, in the quiet of Ethan's room, and let the stillness wash over me. Some endings are messy. Some don't feel like endings at all. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe.